Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a multitude of mechanics that see experimentation and innovation that aims to improve the overall strength of said mechanic, unless they're Gemini. Geminis are an old concept that revolve around effect monsters that are treated as normal monsters and require an additional summon to get their effects. This mechanic has been utterly useless since its inception. It doesn't matter how strong the effect, it was inherently too slow to be effective, even back then. Gemini's most effective wave of support, and that's being generous with the word, was when they released Chemicritters and Catalyst Field. The actual successes of the mechanic being independent cards like Ill Blood, Alias, and Gigaplant, but these cards were considered playable in spite of them being Gemini. Other than randomly making Red Eyes Geminis, Gemini has seen no new cards, conveying that even Konami has written them off as well. I'm not here to claim this mechanic is an underappreciated diamond in the rough, but I do see value in it that Konami clearly isn't capable of envisioning. An unfortunate setback the mechanic has to deal with is that Geminis are effect monsters while in deck or hand, which sadly is where most normal support cards care about the cards being normal. A cool little detail I noticed while looking at normal support cards: because of the wording on Dragon Shrine, a Dragon Gemini being sent to grave allows you to send another dragon. Shame about that Gemini Dragon lineup though. Wait, this fucker is in the Blue Eye structure deck with Dragon Shrine. Has any human on Earth ever attempted to send this off Shrine, aware they could send another? Konami, start printing good Gemini dragons. Please! Geminis are designed to only be normal monsters on field and in grave, and the field is the absolute worst place to be treated as a normal monster. Since they're normal while on field, they can't do anything to keep your plays going. You're entirely dependent on other cards to do everything. They're effect monsters while they're in hand, and yet not a single one of them has an in-hand effect, which caused me to look up if there's some dumbass ruling that prevents it. First thing I get is a Reddit thread asking why they don't have hand effects. Immersion Breaker, I thought of another card while recording. Why isn't there a Gemini that can special itself from hand, and in the process, make a Gemini on field an effect monster? There are a million ways you could make cards for this. The only plausible reasons they haven't printed ones that do is they either don't care, haven't thought about it, or alternatively, the realization that Gemini card text would effectively be the same length as Pendulum. Between a hand effect, a Gemini effect, and of course, the mandatory text that explains how the mechanic works. I love wasting 3 to 4 lines of card real estate to tell the player this mechanic sucks. While they could design more support that makes it easier to get Geminis online, that won't solve the underlying issue. Simply accommodating its shortcomings is overlooking the mechanical nuances that the weakness leaves room for. There's something more that can be done with the mechanic. This mechanic's greatest weakness could also prove to be its greatest strength. What do I mean by that? Well, the best thing that can be done with Geminis is actually extremely simple. The idea has always been that turning Gemini monsters online is how they are to function, and it just needs to be easier to do so. This line of thinking only ensures Geminis as being effect monsters with extra steps. You need to stop thinking inside the box, and start thinking inside the crazy box. Geminis should be able to turn their effects on and off, and use this ability to do so as points of interaction. This can also give Gemini as a mechanic leeway to utilize non-hard once per turn effects that can't really be exploited outside of its own playstyle. The capability to make sure your Geminis are normal at specific times makes it so that cards that support normal monsters on field can be fully utilized. Ignore this one. Since you're able to control that status at will, I say at will, but it's more so the strategy should have extremely accessible cards that interact with your opponent's cards in order to Gemini summon the monster, as well as turn them off. For simplicity's sake in explaining and not game balance, let's say when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can Gemini summon a normal Gemini, then negate the effect. The challenge in balancing the card's strength is that it has to be interactive enough where it'll always happen, but not something as egregious as Omni-negate when the opponent plays a card. Or we could just pivot to making the deck searching or outright activating Ultimate Offering. The way Gemini as a mechanic currently functions will only ever serve as an outright hindrance. So constantly printing cards that just lessen that problem doesn't really address the inherent issues. This, however, gives Gemini a unique mechanical playstyle that other cards can't really replicate. All this being said, there's another issue we have to wrestle with. There are only 45 Gemini monsters in the game, and less than half of them are remotely good. This is going to cause a problem. I am not making 100 fucking Gemini custom cards for this video. The easiest way to start fixing Geminis, just give them links. I'll talk about my feelings on links as a mechanic in another video, so look out for that. But basically, since links are so ubiquitous in the game, why the hell haven't we just printed any links that help Gemini? You can give Gemini a link 1. It isn't gonna break the game. Link Spider 2! Special Gemini from hand, treated as an effect. Tribute itself, special Gemini engraved, treated as an effect. Boom. One card that makes 2 effect Geminis easily, and isn't a broken generic. Gemini links could also serve as heavy lifting that gives them access to the on and off focused cards. And you can have a design theme with the Gemini links always tributing themselves to enable Geminis, rather than actually being present end field pieces. This way the deck doesn't devolve into generic link climbing bullshit. Outside of links, we have other extra deck tools. Well, sort of. We have a single card for each pre-pendulum extra deck mechanic. None of these made Gemini playable. Let's start with the most effective Gemini support ever printed, Super Alloy Beast Raptinus. This card requires 2 Gemini monsters and makes any Gemini on field an effect monster while it's on the field. Thing is, this card saw 0 play historically. It's recently seen experimentation in Edison format. Only now did anyone bother to look at this card and ask, what if? This discovery made Blazewing's ulti spike from $5 to 30. I love capitalism. Even then, this card alone doesn't make the deck as good as it is, seeing as you can only ever summon it off a 1-of. But this is important for UC. It illuminates the path forward for what must be done. We must print Branded Fusion 2. A generic fusion spell, but the caveat is that all the materials must be Gemini monsters. So any fusion monster that requires a non-Gemini name for its summon is off the table. Outside of this laundry list, we also have more notable mini sub-fusion engines, with Gem Knights, Heroes, and Fossils. But before we start looking at the best resources, we do well to root through the trash first. Well, I said that list was theoretical. There's a sizable amount of those cards that aren't actually possible to make with the current Gemini pool. To add to that, the further obvious part, most of these cards aren't even good. Of the ones that can be made, I'd say 3 are debatably good, and even then, one of these 3 don't even currently function. There aren't even 5 different spellcaster names for Quintet. Here are the Dark Lord materials. Yeah, currently not any good. Now, let's talk about the real gems here. Since they printed 3 different Gemini Gem Knights, we actually have a way to use them as a sub-engine. Most importantly, Seraphonite. Any of the 3 Gem Knights plus a light Gemini means an additional normal summon. And would you look at that? One of the light targets is the face of another engine. Neos Alias gives us access to Omni Heroes, and a couple other situational cards that can be made with multiple copies of itself. If we get more Gemini heroes, or even Gemini D heroes, there's also the potential for these. God, it would be so funny to see DPE in Gemini. On a lesser note, we have one more sub-engine. The Goggle Golem engine. I mean the Fossil Fusion engine. This line of cards requires a rock monster plus a certain level range for each fusion. There's only one Gemini rock in existence. Goggle Golem. So this is his engine now. Noteworthy sends off the high-level fusions are Gigaplant, Phoenix Gearfried, one of the Chemicritters that are good. There's one last thing to mention from fusions before we get back on track with the actual video. Ultimate Great Insect is a fusion monster you can make by tributing a level 7 insect with an equip card equipped to it. There are 0 of those when it comes to Geminis, and there are also no level 8 Gemini insects to make it the way God intended. But the idea would be to at least print a level 7 Insect Gemini, equip it with Supervise, then turn it into Ultimate Great Insect, Supervise, reborn a Gemini. That's it. I've spent like 6 paragraphs on a single hypothetical card. Let's just move on to the other extra deck cards already. Black Brute Draco is a level 8 Synchro that requires any tuner and a Gemini monster. You see, Konami thought they were really cute when they printed a Gemini that can be treated as a tuner when Gemini summoned. there are no actual Gemini tuners, so we'll need some of those. Brute Drago lets you pitch a Gemini in hand to pop a back row. When it's destroyed, you can special a Gemini from grave. There was a mini subset of cards that I've neglected up until this point because now I think they're relevant. There are a collection of monsters that aren't Gemini, but are designed specifically to support Gemini monsters. Energy Bravery is useless. Gemini Scorpion, when summoned, summons a level 4 or lower Gemini from hand, potentially usable. Gemini Summoner, during your opponent's end phase. I'm not going to even dignify the rest of this card with a read. Woodland Archer. Wait a minute. This card's good. What the fuck? He's just a free summon with some setup. He searches any Gemini and isn't once per turn. Bro, this card is a custom! This card needs to be searchable. Full stop. Sublimation Knight. On summon, equip one Fire Warrior or Gemini from hand or deck if destroyed by an opponent's card. And we can stop reading this card now. Featherizer. If it's destroyed in battle, mill a Gemini. So, one of these is insane. One of them may be too slow to be good. Another one of them has niche applications, and the rest are worthless. We should get more non-Gemini Gemini support monsters. A prime example for one could be a card that specials itself easily, gets you another Gemini on field. When used to summon a Gemini-related card, can pop a card anywhere on the field for flexibility, and for a combo with Drago. We summon Drago, effect to get another guy, Drago effect to pop a back row with a discard. We pop Drago, it floats into the card we discarded. This way we can weave into an actual good synchro. Now that I've thought about this combo for more than a second, you could have just made Nightmare Phoenix instead. So a new synchro could justify going through this combo. Preferably another level 8, because the next Gemini in the extra is rank 8. Meta Draco is a rank 8 that specifically requires 2 level 8 Gemini monsters. So the extra deck guys aren't actually treated as Geminis. Surprise! So if we make a new level 8 synchro under the idea that you do the Drago combo, we have to make it revive Drago and do a cheat overlay that's treated as an XC summon. Because Method Drago also needs to be XC summoned specifically for its effect. Wonderful. Considering my notes I wrote mention nothing about it, I assume this card is very good. Let me just read this card. Wait, this card is actually good. Revive a Gemini. Geminis can't be attacked or targeted. Is that a hint of Abramax I taste? And when a Gemini is normal, lovely Labyrinth effect. This card came out first. That's so fucked up to say. Wait, he's a rank 8. She's a level 8. She stole his whole flow. What the fuck? I don't think we need a new Xyz, honestly. This guy just needs to be playable. Now that we've covered all the extra deck options, let's go back to the main deck and talk about Pendulum. I realized we could just make Gemini Pendulums that treats Gemini's Pendulum summoned as effect monsters. That way we can mass Gemini summon. This also skirts around the issue of Geminis being useless on field. While they're scaled, they can actually have effects they can use. Make Pendulum retrains of all of the Vsauce counterparts. Forgive me if I betray Vsauce lore, I'm not up to speed on it, so if this goes against it, simply consider this the New Testament. The Gemini aspect refers to how birth has no bearing on one's own character. We're all considered normal in that regard. All equal. The Pendulum effect represents one's own potential, something that sets us apart from each other. The effect post-Gemini summon represents the person born from that potential. I don't know shit about Beta, but you can make up the headcanon of how his Pendulum effect represents the fact that he too had potential for good. Since Vsauce lore is basically the same as Arc 5, we can also end this with Pendulums that follow an end goal of fusing all the extra deck mechanics into one big fuck-off asshole. Just a minor conflict of interest. We can't fuse off this asshole because he's banned! We can just copy the Dimension Magicians that are treated as correct materials, but we should also consider making more heart monsters in the same vein as the Supreme King Dragons. Another lore concept I would like to see implemented for gameplay reasons is cards that treat all Geminis from the grave or extra deck as effect monsters. But enough of this lore nonsense. Let's talk about the final supplementary mechanic before this video goes on for another 40 minutes. Gemini have a sizable amount of cards that flirt with equipping. We have Supervise, the best Gemini support card ever printed. We have 3 monsters based around equips. 2 of them are playable, but the other isn't. Since Fire Warriors have an equip theme and Gemini have Supervise, there's room to experiment further with equip cards. Supervise 2! It can be just like Supervise, but it can bounce to hand to turn a Gemini back to a normal. Then have additional equip shenanigans with the strategy. It can be re-equipped to get the effect back online or equipped to another monster. Implementing equips into the mechanic can also give a home to the power tool monsters. Other than equips, there's also room to design a bridge between Gemini and decks that centralize around normal monsters. The Pacifist Field spell gets in the way of swarming with Geminis, but it also has a theming of equip spells. You could make a Gemini version of Phantasm Spiral Dragon that makes it actually easier to facilitate the intended playstyle of the deck. Of course, this means printing more support that makes the Gemini accessible, as well as new equips that enable it. The only problem is that when it becomes an effect, all of the equips go to grave because they require the monster to be normal. You could make an equip that has a quick effect and normal summon on your opponent's turn. This way you can normal a Gemini to have an effect. The fact that it loses all the equips upon becoming an effect could be a funny way to dodge removal like Evenly Matched from banishing the equips. And then a way to get the original vanilla and slap all the grave equips onto it. There's also Red Eyes, which has an equip and Gemini theme that's not actually being utilized. They only need to make a coherent connection between the two, and then we might actually start getting somewhere. Other than that, we have the suite of normal Pendulum archetypes with Ignite, Metal Foes, and Draco Slayer. In the case of Metal Foes, Geminis have the flexibility to be a normal for Alcahest. That's something. And of course, there's always room for the World Chalice stuff. But perhaps more enticing is the potential with something like Tenyi. You don't know how much I love this archetype and hate it relying on Sword Soul. With the focus on non-effect monsters, it leaves room for utilizing the versatility of Gemini as a mechanic. Start printing Gemini Tenyis. Then, I can't believe I'm about to say this, the Tenyi Geminis can be even better than the old ones. You give them the effect to special summon themselves from hand without the same restriction. Since they're normal on field, all the effect ones are still live to summon. You can then use your normal on the Tenyi Gemini, one of the little Tenyis, or more likely, a Sword Soul. It gives room for Tenyi cards to have support that focuses on non-effect monsters in grave and has versatility between Geminis and the vanilla links. There's endless room for experimentation. The time I'm willing to spend isn't. So let's move along to the last and least inspired ideas. Gemini has a breadth of support cards, but the only searcher for them is Gold Knight on summon, meaning Supervise does nothing for this idiot. This card was printed 3 years ago. How have we still not found out a way to print a good Gemini? Here's a list of the cards we can search. Now here are the ones that are playable. There's also the Catalyst Field package, which can help out. Other than that, there's these 2 cards that I think if you made better cards that also search and cycle them, like the Runic spells, could make them worth playing as soft garnets. To buff out the support, here are a couple spell ideas. Draco Face-Off, but with Gemini Pendulums. Trade-In, but Gemini. Gemini Soul Charge. A quick play that turns both an effect Gemini and an opponent's monster into normals. A continuous spell that triggers on summon of a Gemini, getting a Gemini from deck to field and allowing an additional summon for the Gemini it got. Hell, all these spells, fuck it, why don't we just make a Gemini Sky Striker and assimilate Sky Striker into Gemini? In summation, all Konami has to do in order to fix Gemini is simply print good Gemini cards. They just haven't conceptualized the idea. I hope this video managed to open people's eyes and realize just how much potential this worthless mechanic actually has. There are people that like this mechanic. I'm not one of them. I'm just not a fan of entirely discarding mechanics because they're seemingly useless. At the end of the day, a weak mechanic is simply a greater challenge posed for designers. Konami only needs to stand up to that challenge and not ignore them. I intend to have this be a series in the future, so in the description is a poll where you can vote for the next feature in the series. While I intend to do all of them, their placement will affect in which order I cover them.